Cristian Pocho Salcedo. Greetings to our viewers and TV stations in Latin America and those tuning in from coast to coast across the continental United States and Hawaii. Here in New York, we are ready to decode the stories that shape our world. This is not just the news. This is the DNA of the news. Nearly 1 in 5 people in the United States today are Latino. The Latino vote and its voice are growing stronger. However, this is not a single cohesive voting bloc. The Latino population is diverse, ranging from their places of origin and number of generations to their religious preference. Our guest, among other things, states that preference for religion is the most important predictor of how Latinos will vote. Dr. Cristian Dona-Reveco, welcome to the DNA of the News.
Thanks for having me.
Cristian Dona-Reveco is Director of the Office of Latino/Latin American Studies, OIAS, and Associate Professor in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. His research interests are on migration decisions, migration policies, and the access to social rights by Latin American immigrants in the Americas. At OIAS, his current research includes several community-engaged research projects on Latinos in Nebraska. In his research, he uses oral histories and life stories, news media content analysis, policy and archival analysis, and quantitative methods. He holds a PhD in Sociology and History, 2012, and a Master of Arts in Sociology, 2007, from Michigan State University, a Master in Political Sciences with a concentration in International Relations from the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, 2007, and a Licenciatura and Professional Degree in Sociology from Universidad de Chile, 2002. He has published book chapters and articles on international migration, exile, and memory among other themes. His research has been published in International Migration, Migration Letters, Journal of Urban Affairs, The Latin Americanist, as well as book chapters and technical reports.
So today we're going to be speaking about religion and its influence among the Latinos in the United States. But first, give us your overview, a 30,000-meter view from above, as to what is the frame of the Latino vote in the United States.
So we need to think that even though pundits, every time there's an election, they say that the Latinos voted in a particular way, that there are multiple Latino votes, right? There is country of origin clearly influences, but not only country of origin, also a moment in which they left the country and reason why they left the country, right? So we understand, this is well known, that the Cubans in Florida tend to be more or vote more for Republicans. And that is associated to, even though both parties have supported the Cubans in Florida against the revolution, they see that they're more supported by Republicans, so they tended to vote that way. Now, there are going to be changes because the number of second generation, third generation Cubans that are obviously being born here might change that dynamic. We also know that Mexicans do not vote the same everywhere, and if that were the case, Texas will be democratic a long time ago, but it's not. So there are 20 independent countries in Latin America, more or less. There are 20 different Latino votes. And again, in the reason why they came, when they came, obviously it's important to identify what happened. And also in the case of those who are immigrants and not born necessarily here, the political involvement, political participation, and their political perspective in the country of origin also is going to translate in some way, or might translate in some way here to be more similar to one party or to another.
And perhaps also some impact by where they end up living. It's one thing to be living in the coast and the Midwest, in the South, so that will add to that complication.
Yes, of course. There's the local politics also influences or reinforces some of these dynamics. I would argue that Latinos, in somewhat general, might be more liberal in California than in Florida because they are in those particular areas.
Now, also the size. The Latino population topping, I guess, 63 million Latinos able to vote. That will make a big difference. And we see how much of a factor there in Florida, Arizona, California, New York. Recent Latinos coming from Venezuela, they have definitely their own perspective of the world. So how has it changed over the last 25 years? Has it been a big shift as to how Latinos vote in general, historically?
So historically, Latinos have voted for the Democratic Party. That is the fact. Now, that is, as you mentioned well, it is dependent on region where they are, right? Now, what is changing is that the Latino population is growing more due to Latinos being born in the U.S. or as important than to immigrants, right? And the countries of origin of the immigrants are shifting, right? People from the Northern Triangle are never going to be more than Mexicans because Mexicans had initially a larger number, right? And we're talking about a country of 100 million people versus countries that have 10, on average, 10, 12 million people. But because there's new people coming, because there is second, third generation being born in the U.S., there might be some form of quote-unquote assimilation of the Latino vote in certain aspects to the majority vote. And by that mean that certain groups might vote similarly to the same vote in the entire country. There were a few surveys or polls that came out recently where they show that Latino men, especially those who are working in lower, so they're working class, tend to vote similarly to white overall, the white overall men population, meaning more votes for Trump than Latino women, for example.
And I can see that, but also the Latino participation. We tend to speak about the Latino vote in presidential elections, but also if it's there in the local politics and the election of who is going to be the mayor of a small city. I mean, it is in all levels now of participation because Latinos are more active, and I think they are their voice is being heard at all levels, just because their political participation has grown over the years, I think.
Yeah, and I think that is. I mean, if we look at other places, not the coasts or the other South, or Texas, Arizona, Nevada. If we look at what's called the new receiving states, or states where the Latino population has grown more in percentage in the last few years, we're going to start seeing that. Georgia, Alabama have been some of the states have received larger percentages of Latinos recently, or where the Latino population has grown significantly. That is going to change it's going to influence. I don't want to say change. It's going to influence the electoral dynamics of those states. In my own state of Nebraska, today Nebraska has about 13% or 12% of the population are Latinos, and they're heavily concentrated in certain areas, right? And Omaha itself has 16% Latinos, right? And there are some zip codes that are already majority Latino, right? So in those areas, the Latino vote, we know that it's varied, is going to be more important, really more important than the non-Latino vote. Now, again, as we said, and this is, it's going to be different. It's going to be depending on country of origin, depending on other influences. And what else might be interesting, and this is a hypothesis that one could pose, that if we can assume that there is one Latino vote, it would only be in smaller communities, not at the national level, right? Because in that communities is where there's a integration, or there is a merger of Latinos that is more obvious, right? You have not only Mexican restaurants, but you have Mexican Guatemalan restaurants, and where there are some groups that are so much a minority, Chileans in Nebraska, that their vote might be, the way they vote might be more like the majority of Mexicans in Nebraska, for example. So it might be, if there's one Latino vote, it's going to be at the smaller community level.
Very, very, very interesting. And we're going to be talking about an important predictor that you wrote about, which is religion and how Latinos vote. But I would like to ask you about something that is on the top of discussions. How do Latino voters in this cycle view current immigration policies, and how do these affect the voting decisions during this cycle, for example?
What I've found, reading other surveys, or polls, not my own, is that it is important, but it's not the most important. That might have to do with the distance between the years, right, between the time the person has migrated and where they now vote, right? That the immigration is not as present in some of them, right? There might be other effects. One effect that I've found interesting, and there is some research on this in here in the United States, is that new older Latino immigrants tend to see new Latino immigrants as less deserving. Not all of them, of course, but there's some older Latinos, or Latinos have been here longer, tend to look at new Latinos coming less deserving. So they think that immigration law should be more strict. But it's not the most important, but it is important, but it's not the most important. Obviously, the economy, the day-to-day things tend to influence more.
Well, thank you very much. We have come to the end of this segment, and we promise to our viewers that we will be talking about the influence of religion on Latinos and how they decide to cast their votes. And we'll be right back right after this short break.
How much difference can one vote make? Since 2023, more than 60 U.S. elections have been tied or won by just one vote. So this fall, your friend could be the tiebreaker. And that could make all the difference. People are more likely to vote when encouraged by a friend. So use your power to decide this election. Make sure you're good to vote and encourage your friends to make a voting plan at votevotevote.com.
Well, we are back with Dr. Cristian Dona-Reveco. He joins us from Omaha, Nebraska, here discussing about the Latino vote in the United States and the impact of religion on the Latino vote. I'll start asking you something that I learned about Latinos. I've been living in this country as an immigrant for many years, I realized that although before I came, I felt that my neighbors were different. I come from the Andes of Latin America or South America, and I thought that Argentinians were different than Chileans, Chileans different than Venezuelans, than the Bolivians, and the Mexicans. When you come to this country and you kind of quickly realize that they're pretty much facing the same problems, facing the same difficulties, and as Latinos living in Latin America, we are more the same than we are different. And when we come here, we see the similarities a lot more than we see the differences. Did that happen to you?
Yes. And I am fairly a privileged migrant. I came with a scholarship to do my PhD. I came to the university, in a college town where all my peers or all the Latinos were like me, right? Different countries, but we're all college and studying masters and PhD programs. So my conditions were different. Now, there is some form of grouping, right? That happens, right? Latinos that tend to have similar problems. But there's two things that I think that are important to consider. One, there's still no Latinos in Latin America, right? So we have when we come with that backpack what it means to be from a particular country, and what do we think in our own countries from the country next door, right? And that's something that we need to unlearn when we're here, because here it's irrelevant, right? It's irrelevant because we are not identified as Chileans, Bolivians, only as Latinos, and sometimes even all as Mexicans. But it's irrelevant because it doesn't solve whatever needs we have, right? So that is something that we need to unlearn. And then there's a majority of Latinos, there are of Mexican origin, that we, in most states, there's some small differences in New York, in Florida, that people like me from countries that have a much smaller immigration, we have to basically assimilate or to that Mexican culture or to that Mexican immigrant culture in some way. That's one thing. And the other goes back to how I explain on my own migration, right? We have Latinos in the U.S. or Latino immigrants come from all social class, all levels of education, right? And in that sense, those who have with higher levels of education or higher income or very high income, we have, Latinos who own or are CEOs, not a lot of them, but of gigantic companies. They tend to be more like their class peers, right? And those in the lower, in the working class, they also tend to have similar needs or similar concern than other people in the U.S. in the similar class position. So that's obviously going to influence voting, but that influences how we live our migration, how we experience our engagement with the society of reception, in this case, the United States.
So probably that also will inform how the perception on political participation is, voting patterns, and what issues are of interest to one and the other. So even the Latino vote gets broken down even in more sections.
Right, exactly.
Well, I promised our audience that we were going to be talking about the impact of religion. You are of the idea, and you wrote about it. You published your findings about the impact of religion on the Latino vote as the most important or a main predictor of how they will vote. So let's talk about Latinos and religion. Latinos come to the United States. There are perhaps three groups. The Catholics, because that is part of the tradition, whether they are cultural Catholics or they are, let's say, converted or militant Catholics, for lack of better words, Protestants and evangelicals, and those with no affiliation. So kind of describe those groups for our audience, please.
So has been significant changes in religious participation in Latin America and in here of Latinos in the U.S. It used to be in Latin America that 80-90% of the population was Catholic. Now that has decreased to 70-65%, depending on the country, with the growth going to those who are Protestant or evangelical. Something similar has happened in the U.S. Today, only about 50% of Latinos identify as Catholics. That has come down in the last 10 years from 60-65%. And a larger group, 40% or so identify as Protestant or as other evangelicals, right? Now, what we found, this is research I did with Dr. Laura Alexander here at the University of Nebraska in Omaha, is that religion does influence, or religious participation does influence voting interest or party interest. So, for example, while 53-54% of Latinos Protestant identify as the Democrats, about 75% or 73% of Latino Catholics identify as Democrats. So there is a difference, right? And those unaffiliated, it's about 2/3 are Democrats. So there are significant difference between Latino in a particular religion and how they, what party they participate, they identify or lean to in the United States.
I have a question for you. How the political parties deal with that? I mean, how are there any initiatives on the Democratic side or Republican side to draw from that pool of Latinos based on their religious affiliations?
My experience, and this is looking at how they engage in advertisement, and it said no, there isn't at that level, right? There's I think that parties still consider or still thinking about the Latino vote in general, except when you look at elections lower in the ticket, so state elections or city elections, because it is too expensive to say, okay, we're going to spend X amount of money on courting the Salvadorians in Michigan, right? Because the percentage is not. So I think that is an economic argument that they see the Latinos as one, even though they know, I'm sure, because they have people that knows about this, that there's not a one Latino vote. Therefore, there isn't differences by religion. Now, where I think that we will find those impacts is in communities. So, and this opinion leaders, in this case, the priest, the pastor, the community, the religious community leader has a lot of work, right? Or has a lot of influence. It's that person that in their homily or in their Sunday lecture, that they define certain values that can be approached to one or the other party. And that's where the influence comes. So if I were, if someone from a candidate called me and says, how do we deal with this? I say, well, don't worry about the people itself. Worry about which are the leaders, right? Which are the community leaders, in this case, the priest or the pastor, or for that matter, the owner of the bar, in the corner bar. That also has, but that those community leaders are the one that can translate larger politics into everyday politics for their communities.
I appreciate that. In the last few minutes that we have, what is the one thought that you would like to leave our audience that speaks English, our own Anglo audience in particular, one thought they would like to leave them with that will help them to understand the Latino vote?
So I think that they should consider the Latino vote in the same way they consider the non-Latino vote. There's not one U.S. vote, right? There's not one Latino vote. And even more complex is the influence of country of origin and political participation or the reasons why they migrated, the political participation in the country of origin. Because there's significant differences on the party system in the U.S. You have a two-party system in the U.S., and in our countries, we have from one-party system to a 10 or more parties that are all different. So those even make it more complex to understand this idea of a Latino vote. So don't think about the Latino vote as one, because it's as wrong as thinking of the non-Latino vote as one.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much for spending all this time with us, and I hope to have you back in the show soon. Perhaps after the elections, we can take a look at this and see, what happened and why it happened. It's a pleasure, Cristian. Be back again soon.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us on this journey to understand what is at the core of the news. Stay curious, stay informed. Until next time, see you in our next edition.